Hey guys, Bay Area Aquatics here, coming at you with a video discussing how to grow out a planted tank, or at least how I do it. There's 100 different ways to do it, but I'm going to tell you guys what I have experience with. As you can see, we added some more plants since the last update. Everything's doing really well. I actually have the pump turned off because I'm going to do a water change in a second, but I just wanted to show you if it can capture it on this iPhone camera here, a lot of the purling that's going on. Really difficult to see. You can kind of see some of the bubbles rising up against the background there. The fish are kind of disrupting it a lot. But if you look closely, you can see all the little bubbles just in the background there, just kind of floating up to the top. So that indicates that the plants are very happy. I'm not going to go into the science of what purling is, but it means the plants are happy, which happy plants equals lots of growth. All of these plants in here I've had for less than a month in this tank, and they're already doing really well. Like for example, this dwarf sage here. A lot of this is new growth. That's an entirely new plant. A lot of new growth in there. We have the swords in the back there looking really good. One of them has a hole in it. I saw a fish bite it, so we'll see how that goes. I just added that large red tiger lotus back there. You can kind of see it growing. We got a green tiger lotus in that corner. That's already growing a ton. Angelfish are all up in the camera. Look at you, dude. We added some Riccia fluitans to this rock as well as the output there. I've done that before. I've had a lot of success with it as long as you can keep it secure. Lots of growth on the hydro there. The crypts are going through their little melt right now, which is to be expected, especially because these are terrestrially grown, so they're going to melt a little bit. The carpet is doing nice. I haven't seen a ton of new growth, like new stems and whatnot, but I've seen a lot of laying over and a lot of rooting, so that's good to see that the carpet is getting ready to expand. Okay, so I'm going to go over the top points that I think make a really good planted aquarium. If you guys have followed my channel for any amount of time, you've probably seen my 55 or my 90 gallon, which were fully planted. The 55 was probably the best one, I think. I had that years and years ago. Anyways, so the number one thing I think is crucial to have is lighting. Obviously, plants are photosynthetic. They thrive off light and CO2 and nutrients and whatnot. So lighting would be key, in my opinion. For my tanks, I've always had T5. That's just a matter of personal preference. The technology in LEDs has exploded in the past years, and I like LEDs. I've ran LEDs on my reef tanks. I've had a lot of success with them on saltwater, but for whatever reason, I just have a preference for T5 on freshwater. That's just me. Everybody has a personal preference. So as long as you get your lighting down, you're going to be good. I like to run a lot of lighting, and I go by that old watts per gallon rule. So I have a 4-bulb T5 over this 40 gallon, which puts it over twice the amount of wattage per gallon, I believe, maybe close to 3 times. And that's considered a high light territory. Obviously, that's going to depend on what kind of plants you keep, because if you're going after a low light planted tank, you're going to get a less powerful light, but you could still grow a beautiful tank just because your plants are a little bit different. Most of these plants in here are considered highlight, especially the carpeting plants. The hydro likes highlight, you can grow it in whatever. The swords like highlight. The Riccia fluitans likes highlight. Basically, the dwarf sage and the crypts don't really care for it as much, but they can tolerate it. And obviously, I have them a little bit lower in the tank, and hopefully the hydro will cover them and provide some shade a little bit. Once I get a hardscape in here, that'll also help. So once you get your lighting dialed in, that's step number 1. Step number 2 would be the substrate. Now, substrate is something that I kind of strayed off on a long time ago. And if you've seen the other videos, I run dirt. You can kind of see it there. It has a little bit of algae growing in there. We got some detritus, mulm, all that good stuff, which is fine. The dirt naturally processes that. I have a bunch of snails that kind of turn it over once in a while. Sometimes I'll get in there with a scrubber and kind of get the brown algae out of there. Not a big deal. It's all nutrient based anyways that the plants are feeding off of, so you kind of want that stuff in there in my opinion. But dirt is a little bit of a tricky substrate because it has to go through its own cycle on top of the nitrogen cycle, so you have to do them kind of separately from my experience. There's a lot of articles and whatnot about running dirt. You could really run any plant-based substrate. I know there's hundreds of them. But in my opinion, they're all super expensive. They're just forms of dirt in a sense. They just have different nutrient capacities. Basically, if you're running anything based on planted tanks, you'll be fine. I think I've ran a lot of different substrates before, and I've seen a lot of substrates ran before as well. As long as you have kind of the trifecta of things going on, which I'm going to get to in a minute. First being the lighting, second being the substrate, and fourth being the nutrients, you'll be good to go. So your substrate plays an important role. You can do a lot. Just find whatever works for you, find whatever works for your budget, and as long as it's, you know, geared toward plant-based, you'll be just fine. And what I did a lot of research before I went dirt, and I found that it worked because it's kind of like this far out idea to put, you know, gardening dirt with fish and make them survive and make it work really well. So just read a lot of reviews, see whatever brand is hot nowadays. I don't even pay attention to what is, you know, in and what is out, because to me it's all the same, just with a different brand. And, you know, they all say they can handle more nutrients than others and whatnot. Another thing you could do too, I've seen this done with a little bit less success, but still I've seen beautiful tanks happen because of this. They'll use substrates such as like straight sand, which sand has like almost no properties for, you know, holding the minerals that plants need, just because it's so fine and whatnot. A lot of people use those root tabs. I forget who makes them. I think Seachem makes them. I've used them in the past myself. They were pretty good. I like to put them along the base of the large rooting plants like the hydra and the sword, and those guys just eat them up like crazy. It's perfect, and you have to replenish them every once in a while, but they're really effective for a tank where you don't have, maybe you have an existing substrate and you don't want to go digging it up, but you want to add live plants. And then to complete the trifecta to grow plants, again in my opinion, would be the fertilizers. Everybody who has like an outdoor garden or even a lawn uses fertilizers because plants need minerals too to eat. They don't just go off pure sunlight, they need minerals. So here I have the Seachem line. This is the Aqua Vitra line, and I have just your typical flourish to kind of, you know, supplement that. This is a phosphorus source. This raises general hardness. This actually changes the water chemistry a little bit, talking about GH and whatnot. I don't really use that because my water is naturally hard from the tap, which is kind of along the lines of what plants like. If you're doing like breeding and stuff, the fish like soft water. Typically, that's just a kind of a generalized rule of thumb. This actually adds good traces of nitrate and nitrogen. That kind of helps the biological process a little bit. And then we have iron, and then this right here is just kind of a mixture of trace microelements and whatnot. It says, you know, on the back what it has in it. Nitrogen, potassium, phosphates, sulfur, magnesium, things like that. Plants love this stuff. That's how they grow. That's how you accelerate their growth. I've had a tremendous amount of success with that line in the past, so I continue to use it. But my favorite additive to the fish tank would be this guy back here. It doesn't look that pretty, but this is my CO2 canister. It's kind of leaning. I need to make a little mount for it or something. And it's off right now because I was doing a water change, but I have a little indicator over there, which is blue because I don't have any CO2 running right now. And CO2 is probably my favorite additive to the plants, and this stuff just is like steroids to plants, because that is their most natural biological process, is they convert CO2 into oxygen, and that's a part of how they grow. So if you just crank this tank full of CO2 to the point where it's not dangerous to the fish, that's why I have that little indicator up there to tell me when it's too much and everything like that, to keep the plants happy as well as the fish, you know, breathing. You're going to do really well. Now you have to figure out a way to diffuse the CO2 in the most effective way that you can. So I've shown you guys my sump before. It's nothing crazy special. It's a little dirty, which is fine. It's just a sump. But basically this is how I diffuse my CO2. I've actually modified it a little bit to make it work a little bit better for me. So right there we have our return pump. It goes up and it tees off. That goes right there, goes to the main display tank. And then right here I have controlled with a ball valve and a T. And if you look closely, you can see there's a line that comes into that T. It goes over here, down into this reactor. This was a carbon reactor that I had running on my saltwater tank. And you just put activated carbon in there, and it's a good way to add that to your filtration. However, I don't run activated carbon because it strips all of the nutrients that I'm adding to the tank, so it's kind of counterintuitive to what I want. And basically, this just runs it through that filter. We have, you know, little filters in there. It kind of chops up the bubbles, for a more layman's term of way of saying that. Diffuses the CO2 into, you know, finer grain essentially, so the plants can accept it. And then basically, I need to add more media to actually make that a little bit more effective. But then I just have the hose ran back immediately down to the pump. It goes right into the intake of the pump. So that is how I diffuse my CO2. And the goal is basically to not see any bubbles out of there. I know I'm getting it because usually my indicator is green, showing that I have a lot of CO2 in this tank. But that's really what you want, is so that it is available to the plants and they can use it up readily. Another thing to help with the plants would be your fish stocking. Fish, obviously they eat and they poop, and that adds nutrients essentially to the plants that they can get at through their roots. You know, ammonia, nitrate, stuff like that. Plants just eat it up. So don't be afraid to have a bunch of fish in your planted tank. At the moment, my tank's a little bit overstocked. Well, at least it'd be overstocked if everybody is full grown. At the moment, things are fine. But, you know, we'll see how that goes in the future and probably remove some fish. But the fish are a really, really good natural fertilizer for plants. A lot of hydroponic systems and whatnot to grow produce, like for example tomatoes. I know they do tomatoes with hydroponics. They'll have a stock tank full of like trout or bass or some just stupid hungry fish that grows really, really quickly and poops a lot. Tilapia is one of them. They'll have a stock tank, say 500 gallons of just tilapia, and they'll feed the heck out of it and run it through the grow beds of the tomatoes or whatever produce or plants, and it just grows the produce like crazy. So that's basically the same principle here, is we have fish fertilizing the plants. It's kind of a give and take relationship, because obviously the plants clean the water for the fish and the fish poop in the water for the plants. So it works really well like that. It's a symbiotic relationship. With that being said, guys, I know this tank is still a baby tank. I think it looks beautiful for something that's not even a month old. And I know with the proper care and everything, it's gonna grow into another amazing tank, fully planted. That's how I like my tanks. Barely even able to see the fish. Not really, but I think it looks really good. So those would be my steps to have a successful and beautiful planted tank. You know, start with the basics: lighting, soil, and your fertilizers, and then everything else will come into play. You just have to really experiment with it and go for your own. And then obviously once you get you have a hold for things, you get into, you know, trimming, pruning, like cutting out dead leaves and just maintenance wise stuff, and aquascape. And aquascape is 100% on you and your creative abilities. I don't think I'm the best aquascaper. I honestly just kind of threw these plants in here where I think they would grow out, but hopefully it looks good. Hopefully you guys think it looks cool. There's no hardscape, but we're gonna add a hardscape, probably some manzanita driftwood or something like that. And yeah, if you guys think I missed anything, or if you have some input, please leave that in the comments and we can talk about it and maybe throw that into my next video. So thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for another episode sometime soon.